Okay, so today I would like to address a very serious topic that's been weighing on my mind for quite some time now. I just finished watching this video from Mario Kart Wii 9, aka MKW Anthony, aka Time Attack Tony, titled Super Mario Maker Classy Sanctum Stimulus Field. Now, this is a great video, an excellent level. I highly recommend you all go watch the video now, but that's not really what we're here to talk about today, because this video is emblematic of a much greater problem, something that has plagued the Mario community for as long as man can remember, and that is essay writing. The Kaizo Mario community is really bad at writing essays, and in this video in particular, it's super important because, as you can see, Anthony wrote his whole goddamn dissertation thesis on this level here. So I'm going to be doing an analysis of Anthony's analysis. I didn't want to do this, but I think it needs to be done because it's truly troubling. So let's dive right in and dissect this. He begins his essay with the statement, "Here is a collaboration level between Guitar 13 and Juvenile. It is definitely one of the hardest Mario Maker 1 levels that I have cleared to date. So far so good. That being said, including practice, it took me 19 hours to complete. Though I believe it should have only taken me 12 to 15. Here's my first issue. He ends the sentence and then starts it with though. This is a huge flow breaker here. Like, just saying this aloud. I'm going to say it again. It took me 19 hours to complete. Though, I believe it should have only taken me 12 to 15. This needs to be a semicolon or a comma. This needs some serious reworking, because this is just... it totally destroys the flow of your opening statement, which is critically important, you know? When you're writing an essay, you need to create a voice inside the head of the reader. And right now your voice sounds like a goddamn 6-year-old. So that's the first spot that needs some work. He continues to say, due to the way Guitar and Juvenile created the level, it can be split up into 7 different sections. This is a completely redundant statement right here. Due to the way Guitar and Juvenile created the level, you could then say literally anything about the level. This beginning bit is entirely pointless. I would just say this level is split up into 7 different sections. Not it can be, it is. While the introduction, created by Guitar, is somewhat precise at first, it is easy to get consistent at once completed a few times. Alright, all good there. In the next paragraph here, he begins, the second section, which is Juvenile's first section of the level, he clarifies, was by far the most annoying for me. The one setup that made me despise this section, and overall adding several hours onto my clear time, is the beetle falling from the ceiling onto the bridge. Now, there is a slight grammatical issue here, and that is a tense issue. Here he says, the one setup that made him despise it, as in the past, it has made him despise the section, but then here, adding, present. As in, it is currently adding several hours onto his ongoing clear time, even though he's beaten the level. So what needs to happen here is this and needs to be replaced with a which, and this adding needs to be replaced with an added. So the one setup that made me despise this section, which overall added several hours onto my clear time, is the beetle falling from the ceiling onto the bridge. Okay. The player is supposed to activate an off-screen beetle, which then will spawn a P-switch for the player to spin off. Now, semantic observation here, spin off of, yeah, that's it. This isn't technically wrong here, spin off. Everybody will know what you're saying, but when you're maintaining a formal tone, as is critical in an essay like this, and judging by the vocabulary that he has employed so far in this essay, it's very obvious that he is trying to maintain that formal tone. This is a pretty simple slip-up that's easy to cover up with just an of after the off. He proceeds to say, while this sounds somewhat simple, the beetle most of the times did not spawn the P-switch soon enough, causing me to die to the saw. Now this is just sort of awkward, again, with the voice that I mentioned earlier. The flow of this sentence is awkward, right? the beetle most of the times did not spawn the P-switch soon enough, as opposed to most of the time the beetle did not spawn the P-switch soon enough. See, that's much better. That sounds like you've planned and practiced your essay, as if you were giving a speech, right? Now, in addition to the P-switch spawning late, sometimes it didn't even spawn at all. Overall, if this one setup was not in the level, I would have cleared this at no more than 15. 15 what here, Anthony? I mean, I know you mean 15 hours, because in the beginning you said it should have only taken me 12 to 15, but the subject of hours, which you mention here, has all this space from here to here, in which you introduce several other subjects. So this 15 does not complement this subject directly. Realistically, this 15 could mean anything. Again, I know what it means, but if you're maintaining a formal tone, cleared this at no more than 15 hours. Moving on, he says, the last section of the main world, which was created by Guitar, was my favorite of the entire level. It had nice flow and played consistently. There were a few spots of inconsistencies, though once I realized why, I got the section almost every time. Again, with this sentence here, there were a few spots of inconsistencies. You don't need both of these things to be pluraled. If you insist on having the spots, then there were a few spots of inconsistency. I would personally tend to say there were a few inconsistencies. That just flows a lot better. And also, when you say, I realized why, it's a similar issue to the 15 here. Why what? Like, obviously reading this, I know you're talking about why the inconsistencies were happening, but the space in between the subject and what you're trying to complement it with here makes it unclear. You know, if I were reading this from a strictly technical and objective standpoint. So I would say there were a few inconsistencies, though once I realized why they were happening, I got the section almost every time. Moving on to the subworld, Juvenile's introductory section is not too difficult. There are, however, some small spots of inconsistencies. Again, with the spots of inconsistencies, I would just say small spots of inconsistency or inconsistencies, such as landing on the Spiny before going underneath the cannon launcher. Deaths in this section were somewhat frustrating, however, due to most of them being careless and easily avoidable. Awkward flow here again. I think this, however, is pretty pointless. I would just say deaths in this section were somewhat frustrating due to most of them being careless and easily avoidable. However, it tends to imply that there is something sort of counterintuitive or to the contrary that you would also like to state. Like, this is true, however, this is also true. Whereas these two things, deaths in this section were somewhat frustrating, and most of them being careless and easily avoidable, are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're directly complementary to each other, so this, however, is pretty much pointless. He goes on to say that Guitar's last section in the level, which is the second section of the subworld, was the hardest part of the level for him personally. For starters, there are small inconsistencies that are player-based in this section. More specifically, you need to be able to easily adapt to and react to the different shell speeds possible. This possible is a little bit awkward. Again, reading it, I know what you mean. There are several different possible speeds that the shell can attain. But again, with that formal tone you're trying to maintain in the essay, it doesn't sound right. I would say you need to be able to easily adapt to and react to the different possible shell speeds rather than the different shell speeds possible. It's just awkward to put the possible at the end of that sentence. Depending on when and where you throw the initial spiny shell, the section can play slightly different. Again, I know what you mean, but technically speaking, this should be play slightly differently, not slightly different. Different here is adjective, so describing a noun, but the play here is a verb, as in it can play out, so you need an adverb conjugation, so slightly, differently. Going in between the saw and the wall right before getting pushed by the sideways spring is not too difficult. These commas are a bit excessive. If you were to accentuate these pauses, say you were reading it almost in a theatrical sense, you'd say, going in between the saw and the wall right before getting pushed by the sideways spring is not too difficult. though I had a few deaths to it. It's just clunky. You could definitely cut out a few of the commas here. That's mostly up to the author there. There's not really a single obvious correct way of phrasing that out, but I would definitely consider revision on this. The following 5 seconds of the level is the most challenging for me. Alright, fair enough. Again, I would make a tense argument here. You say, is the most challenging for you, even though back up here, we already talked about it a bit, you were using a past tense, so I would say was the most difficult for me, or was the most challenging for me, rather than is. When falling to land onto the POW block, okay, so right off the bat here, falling to land, pretty redundant, right? That's like saying, I tripped and fell to land on the ground. You don't really say that. You say, I tripped and fell on the ground. So I would just say, when falling onto the POW block, or when landing on the POW block. You need to cancel all your momentum. Once again with the semantic of here, all of your momentum. I know what you mean, of course, but yeah, you need to cancel all of what? Of your momentum. So the of is important. This is especially difficult to do, however, due to the saw directly left of the POW block. I often found myself canceling my momentum too soon, and as a result, here, you know, when I was talking about the of, you don't need it here because there's no all here, you're canceling your momentum. So the momentum directly belongs to you in the my. You don't need the of, just want to clarify that so that it doesn't seem like I'm being inconsistent with the of here and not the of here. Anyway, as a result, he dies to the side of the saw. Once on the POW block, you need to do a first or second frame jump off it. We already talked about this, off of it, same with the P-switch. Following, you then need to spin jump off of, oh, he fixed it here. See, this is good. He learned. We'll see if he keeps that up through the rest, though. Off of the P-switch and grab the POW you just jumped off. No, he did not, off of. Now, the other thing I would mention here is following. This is an awkward way to start a sentence. I see what he's going for. Like, you can say next you need to spin jump off of, but following is in, you know, infinitive verb form, so it's just really doesn't sound quite right. And also, even if he just said following, that would be one thing, but he says following you then, which is a redundancy, because then already indicates that it's following what was preceding, which is the previous sentence. So just following this, you need to spin jump off of the P-switch, or after doing this, you then need to spin jump off of the P-switch. You don't need both, and I would just get rid of following. It sounds awkward here. And grab the POW you just jumped off of. This is especially challenging due to the fact that you needed to avoid grabbing the POW before going to jump off of the P-switch. Preceding, the same thing as following here. It's an infinitive verb form, so it's just a really awkward way to start a sentence. But I would say, you know, in the sequence which precedes the previous or something like that, if you wanted to really keep the word preceding, but it's pretty much irrelevant. I would just say, again, you then need to drop the POW, etc. Anyway. He says, dropping the POW block on top of the cloud is not too difficult. However, it is very difficult to get the POW to be directly under the thwomp's hitbox. I had over 20 deaths in this section where I had dropped the POW block a few pixels too far to the left, making the section impossible. The rest of the section is not too difficult, although you will need to make quick adjustments depending on the location of the moving spiny. This is all fine here. He says difficult a lot. I would consider finding a different word because it's got not too difficult, very difficult, not too difficult, and pretty rapid succession in this little area here. So I would just consider finding a different word. He used challenging earlier. It would be fine if he recycled that, or you know, something similar. Due to nerves, however, he had 4 deaths at that part. Okay. He goes on to say that the last section of the main world, which was created by Juvenile, is pretty easy, with nothing too out of the ordinary. That being said, he still managed to die to it 5 times. The hardest part of the section is probably just getting around the Big Muncher at the start of it. His favorite part of the section was up-throwing the spring into the Big Muncher while waiting for the beetle shell to catch up with him. Due to nerves, however, he died once at the last shell jump and once at landing on the moving spiny right before it hit the last POW block. This is all fine. There's one thing I do notice. He says catching up with me here, but somewhere up here, I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, here, the player. So he uses the player to refer to what they're doing in the level, which is a third person, whereas here he's using me, which is a first person. It has the same meaning, it's just that I would stick with consistency in the person you're referring to throughout the essay. Generally, I would stick with the third person, once again, because of that formal tone that we mentioned earlier. While the last section, the Nye, he specifies, is by far the easiest section of the level, it is not easy enough to one-shot it every single time. He was somewhat scared of dying there, though thankfully he was able to one-shot it in the end. And that is the end of his dissertation thesis there. So yeah, overall, it wasn't bad. I think it's at least worthy of a like. I'm holding off on that subscribe button until the next essay, see if he makes improvements and is worthy of my subscription, of course. But yeah, I just thought this was critically important, and I think the Mario community as a whole should work to be better in this field, strive for improvement truly and deeply. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you have other essays you would like me to review, please let me know in the comments below, because I'm sure you've all fallen in love with this content and are definitely not just biding time until I upload FF4 in like a month from now, because my channel is content deprived until then. So yeah, thanks again, bye-bye.